Good morning, everyone. I'm Sandra Kilgore, Vice Mayor of the City of Asheville, and I'd like to welcome you all to the May 9th Agenda Briefing Work Session. Mayor Manheimer will not be joining us today, and at this time, I would like to, the staff, all council members and staff will be participating virtually. The live meeting will be streamed on the city's YouTube channel, accessed through the YouTube icon on the front page of the city's website via the live stream. The meeting will be available on Charter/Spectrum channel 193. And so you do have the option to listen to the meeting by phone 855-925-2801, meeting code 7017, and watch live on YouTube. And at this meeting today, we will not be taking public comments. And at this time, I would like to go through and identify staff who will be participating with us today. And as I call your name, just say a quick hello. Councilwoman Shanika Smith.
Sandra, I think she'll be joining us shortly.
Okay, thank you. Councilwoman Antoinette Mosley.
Good morning.
Councilwoman Sage Turner.
Good morning.
Councilwoman Kim Rooney.
Good morning.
Councilwoman Maggie Ullman.
Hey, everybody.
City Manager Deborah Campbell.
Good morning.
Assistant City Manager Rachel Wood.
Good morning.
Assistant City Manager Ben Woody.
Good morning.
City Attorney Brad Brennan.
Good morning.
And Dallas City Clerk Maggie Burleson. And at this time, I'd like to turn it over to our City Manager, Deborah Campbell.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. And again, good morning, everyone. As you know, we utilize these meetings to review the upcoming council work session meeting. And our Assistant City Manager, Rachel Wood, will be reviewing the agenda just shortly. We do actually have a relatively short agenda. However, there are two key items on the agenda, one being the manager's budget, and we'll be going into a little bit more detail about the budget under the part of this agenda, other issues and updates. And we'll have staff to provide some additional information that will be, well, actually it'll be a summary of what will be presented on this Tuesday. And also the bid will be on the first reading. So at this time, I will turn it over to Rachel to review the agenda work session.
Thank you, Deborah, and good morning again, Vice Mayor and City Council members. I'll start with a quick overview of the May 14th business meeting agenda. We do have two proclamations. The first will be announcing May 2024 as National Tennis Month. Mary Ann Myers with the Asheville Tennis Association will accept the proclamation. And then the second proclamation is naming May 21st through 27th as National Public Works Week. And we will have staff from our Public Works Department there to receive the proclamation. As Deborah already referenced, we do have a really short consent agenda. So I'm just going to highlight a few items. If I skip over any items that you would like to have covered, please feel free to chime in and I'll be happy to provide a briefing on any items that I skip over. I'm going to start with items B and C. Both of these items are related to the Mills River Phase 2 Water Treatment Plant Miscellaneous Upgrades project. Item B is a $5 million ARPA state revolving loan grant to support the project. And then item C is a $16.8 million construction and repair contract for the project with Hyatt Pipeline LLC. Moving down to item G. Item G is a mutually beneficial law enforcement agreement with UNC Asheville that allows UNC Asheville campus police to extend their jurisdiction beyond the campus, primarily to conduct law enforcement activity in apartment complexes that are in close proximity to the campus and are primarily occupied by UNCA students. Yes, Councilmember Roney.
Yeah, I have a couple questions about this because I'm hearing from folks that are concerned because of the national conversation with student protests and activities on university campuses. The way I was reading it is exactly how you said it, that the UNCA staff would have jurisdiction beyond UNCA boundaries. I think that folks are looking for that confirmation that we're not talking about APD having different levels of jurisdiction, though it's my understanding that on the UNCA campus, because it's in the city limits, that the APD would already have jurisdiction on campus.
That is correct.
So I just wanted to make sure that we're prepared to confirm that if there are any questions on Tuesday.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Kim.
Yes, I know Chief Lamb, as well as the Chief of Police for UNC Asheville Police Department, will be there as well to answer those questions. And this item has previously been reviewed and approved by the Environment and Safety Commission and has previously been authorized by the UNCA Board of Trustees. Moving on to item H, just wanted to quickly note that this is an amendment to the 2024 council meeting schedule. This will move the location of the June 11th council meeting to Harris Cherokee Center, which is currently slated to begin at 5 p.m. And this will also set an affordable housing plan work session for 3:00 p.m. in the council chambers on June 25th. And we'll talk a little bit more about that work session as today's discussion progresses. Moving on to presentations and report, as Deborah already referenced, the big item under presentations is the fiscal year 2025 City Manager's Annual Operating Budget presentation, and we will have a more detailed conversation about that later on in today's agenda. So I'm going to skip over that for now. And then we only have one public hearing, and it is a very straightforward rezoning request on the Electrolux distribution facility, which is located adjacent to the airport. The request is actually to return back to the project's original industrial district zoning. The site was rezoned in 2011 to industrial conditional zone. It had a planned significant site expansion. That expansion is no longer taking place, and the property owner has planned some improvements, including a new loading dock and a truck court that are not compatible with the current zoning, which is why this rezoning to go back to that industrial district zoning has been requested. Then moving down to unfinished business. This is, as Deborah previously referenced, the first ordinance reading for the Downtown Business Improvement District. As a quick reminder, bid consideration is a three-step process. The public hearing was held on April 23rd, and we are now into the first and second reading portion of the process, with the second reading slated for June 11th. As is typical with first and second readings, we are not currently planning to take public comment. And then I wanted to move, yes, Councilmember Turner.
Can you just clarify, are we voting at both? Or is it just a reading?
Yes,
Just a reading.
I'll let Ben answer.
Yeah, you'll and Brad
right.
can too. Either way, but yes, you'll be voting at both of those readings.
And then is the chamber going to be there presenting, or is there any additional information coming out?
I was looking at Brad, but no. As Rachel said, right now there's not any plan for public comment.
Well, I asked because I know there is some back and forth around some of the criteria that had been presented already. So I guess I'm just not sure if that's what we'll be hearing, if there are any changes, or I guess we'll just find out Tuesday.
My sense is if some of the back and forth is at a point where there's like some sense of agreement, then we could ask them to present, or we could, in our discussion, ask them to come up and share some of that would be my hope. But I don't know if things will be landed on by Tuesday.
Okay. I'll plan to have my discussion points then as well. Okay. Thank you.
And then the other thing I wanted to share and suggest for us is that as there's so much conversation happening. We got a lot of really good input during the hearing portion of this whenever that was, that the thing that we're being asked upon is the ordinance, and the ordinance by requirement is very, very specific and focused really on the taxation authority and the map, but there's a lot of other things that are really important to the community that wouldn't live in an ordinance, like the governance, like how an RFP goes forward, etc. And so I'd like to suggest that we also pursue having a resolution that goes alongside the ordinance and that we could consider and be prepared for everyone to weigh in and have input by the June 11th time. And so it's different than the ordinance, but it would be a resolution that we would all look at and we would all weigh in on. So things that we're discussing and kind of getting to some sense of agreement, for example, that applications would be an open application process. We get that in writing in a resolution and we all agree upon it and consider voting upon it, so that if this moves forward, there's documentation of what the conversation has been, because otherwise it would be, we approve the ordinance, which has very little information, and then we wait for a long time, and then there's the RFP where a lot of other details is determined. So I'd like us to consider doing that and can work on drafting that so that we just mile mark any agreements we make throughout the process.
Okay, and Brad, could you speak now?
Thank you, Vice Mayor. And I see we have two other hands up, so I'll be short. I actually think Councilmember Ullman covered what I was going to say very succinctly and well. I want to just remind council members that although there are a lot of details that have been discussed about how this will be managed, the particular services, by statute, the only items that you'll be voting on that would be included in the ordinance are the establishment of the bid, the geographical boundaries of it, and essentially we would add in there the first intended year's tax rate. That's something that is reset every year anyway if a bid is established, but that is it. All of those other details that I think have been part of the public discussion, as well as your discussions with stakeholders dealing with how the services will be delivered, how the board will be managed, what advice council would receive and from who, all of those can be dealt with, as Councilmember Ullman has pointed out, as part of a separate document that could be combined, but that would not happen until the second vote. So this first vote, you're only voting per statutory limitations on, do you want to bid or do you not want to bid in this particular occasion, and what that initial tax rate would be. All of those other items are simply not included in a traditional bid ordinance, so they'd be dealt with separately. And I know that there are so many elements to this and so many details, so I do want to remind council, please reach out to me. We certainly don't have to do this all today, but if you have any questions or would like to discussing this further, I know that Ben and I have both been researching this quite a bit, so I think we can answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Brad. And Councilwoman Rooney?
Sure. I just wanted to confirm that it sounds like staff is going to be making this presentation. We're not going to have a presentation from the chamber unless we're asking for specific information. Is that true that council or that staff will be presenting this ordinance change? Surely someone is going to stand up there and say, this is the this is the information, right?
It will be a brief introduction and possibly history of where we've been and where we are today and requested action. That will be all. We will not be going into the actual details of what has been proposed. We will, I'm assuming, then also just say here is what has been proposed in terms of what Brad stated, the tax rate and the geographical area.
Okay. And I guess
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I guess the follow-up question would be, like, if we're talking about a resolution for June 11th, will we also be expected to speak to what we anticipate to be in the resolution at this meeting? Because I imagine there will be people to speak in the general public comment, since there's not a public comment on this issue on the agenda.
That's exactly what I was going to speak to too, Kim. I think it would be helpful for the community's broader understanding of what's going on if we try and, as a council, formulate some of our thoughts around what that resolution might contain at this meeting, so that there's time to flush it out, time to get a little input, and then come together at the next meeting or at the one where we actually vote on it. But because I think it's imperative for me personally to be able to even make a first vote that some of that discussion is had. Because without it, it's just so much open-ended unknown. So I'm hoping we can have a pretty good discussion on what that resolution might include at Tuesday's meeting.
And I'll defer to Brad to determine if that, what the boundaries are in terms of
Yeah.
the second document.
Yeah, I think to be determined. So council, again, the bid process is somewhat complex. It is lengthy for a reason, and quite frankly, there are multiple ways to do this. Different cities have handled the bid formation and the bid structure differently. That is good news in that you have a great deal of leeway to an extent to be able to operate this if you choose to go in this direction. However, it does add a certain degree of complexity to the process. So what I can say is that handling these things as separate documents, but simultaneously, is certainly one way to do this. The ordinance itself merely establishes the bid. That's all that it does. It then allows you through a secondary document, which could take place at any point up to and including in contemporaneously done with your second vote, something like a resolution that would go out and lay out your intentions as a council about how some of these other details would actually play out. And that could include the management structure. That would include whether or not any sort of advisory board would be established as part of this. I do want to mention that it is important to note that because we would have a resolution, although we wouldn't be taking additional comment on the bid since we've already had that public hearing, we would absolutely be taking public comment again on a separate resolution. So there would be another opportunity for that. And I do also want to mention that before any sort of private entity could be engaged, if a bid is established to actually provide the services, the statutes require us to go out and gain additional public input, engage with the public to determine what sort of services are needed to be provided. That is intended to inform the RFP to select that provider. So there is built into this process by law additional obligations on the city to engage with the public before issuing the RFP. That's both a good thing, and also I want to caution you, we don't want to get too far ahead of that process and establish what the RFP would look like, because there is a built-in opportunity for you to gain insight from the public before those parameters are established.
Ben, would you like to chime in? We can't hear you, Ben.
Yes, I'm sorry. I'll speak after the council members have finished their comments. I just want to wrap up one last thing at the end. Thank you.
Okay. Councilwoman Mosley?
Kind of going back to what Brad just said about getting ahead, I'm wondering what real legal position does a resolution actually hold? I guess what I'm saying, if there's a resolution and we decide next Tuesday that this is what we want, hopefully to move forward, but then hearing more from the community, what if we change our minds? Does the resolution actually hold any legal weight?
I think the best answer that I can give to that, Councilmember Mosley, is it depends on what's in the resolution. It depends on what you end up including in that. Generally speaking, I anticipate that the items that would be included that would be more of a reflection of intent on council as opposed to a binding statement. The ordinance is law, and that's why it's so limited in what it actually does. Some of the other details, which I think you would use the resolution to communicate to the public your intentions going forward, given that this is a multi-step process, would still be defined through later action, i.e., if you were to establish a bid and decide you wanted to award a private contract, that would be an entirely separate action. The public would be able to comment on that as well, be informed through an RFP, competitive bidding process. There are multiple steps in this process, so I anticipate that a resolution would likely be a statement of intent to showcase whether or not council was on the same page with that, and then to communicate that to the public.
So Brad, I just want to understand what you're saying. So you basically say that because when you talked about the public comment being able to, once we get ready to do the, the proposal, whatever. Now, and like what Antoinette was saying, how much weight does that carry? And you said something about getting ahead. So I'm trying to sort of confuse. even if we've got that in there, and then after we take public comment, we can go back and actually redo that resolution that more or less sort of line with what the public may think, as opposed to what we're gathering now.
I think that's certainly possible. Really, any resolution that council passes for the most part can be amended later. That would include this one.
Right.
And again, until we know exactly what council wishes to include in a resolution, I'm being a little premature in speculating about what each one of these things may mean or may not mean. So I don't want to get too far ahead of myself either and say that this is just an option for council to be able to collect and compile those additional details that would not go into the ordinance. And again, the ordinance is very simple. The ordinance just says we are establishing a bid and this would be the initial tax rate. If you decide to pass it, that would be the only thing contained in the ordinance. But certainly the discussions around the bid have included other topics as well. So a resolution that goes along with this would allow you to communicate your collective intent to the public on some of those things. You do have the ability to alter those in the future. A bid itself is not permanent. A bid can be altered year to year and through the various contracting processes. So this is something that I think it gives you the option to at least set the initial stage and determine if you want changes later on.
Thank you. Councilwoman Turner.
Just sharing briefly that our documents, I think it was with the agenda briefing, was another bid kind of information document that staff put together. It was so helpful. There's some links within it. There's actually a list of all of the existing bids and their tax rates for North Carolina. It was fascinating info if you dig in. One thing that stuck out to me was the Raleigh-Durham model as well, one of our older models in the state, but it's almost a transactional way of doing it. It's just curious, and I encourage everyone to look at that if they get a chance.
Thank you. Ben?
Thank you, thank you, Vice Mayor Kilgore. And real quickly, just to wrap all this up, as Ms. Campbell said, staff, we are prepared to provide an informational presentation to start the ordinance reading, so we'll be prepared for that. And the other thing I was going to say is what Councilman Turner just referenced. We did include a memo to council that I think gives a lot of content. A lot of what Brad said can be found in that memo, so it really helps, I think, not only the council, but the community to understand kind of the procedural requirements for a bid, because it really can be very complex. But the other thing is we will link to that and attach that to our staff report as well. So we want to make sure that information is available to council and the community. And again, we'll be prepared to kind of review that at the beginning of this item. So thank you.
Okay, so wrapping up the May 14th City Council agenda under new business, we do have a slate of boards and commissions appointments. And barring any questions around those appointments, we'll then move into our briefing on upcoming council committee agendas, and I'll turn it over to Ben to cover the May 13th Planning and Economic Development Committee.
Thank you, Rachel. And we have two items on the PED agenda for next week. The first is an update from our planning staff on missing middle housing reform. And that's going to go through how the staff is preparing to move forward with missing middle implementation recommendations. But also we're going to spend some time on the anti-displacement strategies that are included in that missing middle study. So staff's going to try to present to PED how we are proposing to balance implementation of those missing middle housing recommendations, along with making sure that we're hitting the mark on some of the anti-displacement strategies that need to either accompany or be in place as we move forward with some of these potential changes. And I expect that as we continue to work towards some of these affordable housing priorities and goals, along with HCD, we'll probably be back multiple times in front of PED to share regular updates on the missing middle work. So this is probably the first of many. The second item is really started at the request of Councilwoman Turner, and she had asked staff to give an update on kind of how we handle affordable housing from a permitting perspective, and we're going to do that. And so the first part of this is Mark Matheny from DSD is going to talk a little bit about some of the efforts we've used to really prioritize affordable housing. And really that would be prioritize any development types that align with council priorities. But I think also Mark's going to kind of provide some insight into some of the changes that we're looking to make. Where maybe more than just prioritize, we can truly begin to expedite priority projects. So we're kind of evolving our process to be a little more nimble and responsive to council priorities. And then the other piece of that, and which really enables us to do that in a lot of ways, is we are in the process of implementing new permitting software. So thank you to council for approving that. And I think that software, in some of the procedures and processes that we can use that to enable, will also position the city to be a lot more responsive in terms of our permitting process and how that connects to council priority projects. And that is it for next month or next week's PED meeting. Thank you. Councilwoman Owen.
That might be a bit of a request for a future PED, just to make sure council's kind of abreast of, is around the I-6 project, which will radically transform our whole city. So DOT did select their bidder, and they're using a process called a optimization refinement within the design build process. So O&R, and what's important to know is we all know from the press that their bids came in right over budget. And so this process has allowed them to select a bidder, and now they're able to spend 4 to 6 months negotiating down the proposal with the bidder, doing some really technical work along the way instead of making guesses. If we did X, we'd cut this dollars. They're going to be able to like engineer some solutions. And there's been a lot of conversations about how much work the community has put into identifying what's most important to us, and council has codified that over time with solutions. And so DOT is really providing assurance that the process to get the price down won't push back on keeping interstate traffic off the Bowen Bridge or any of the multimodal stuff or any of the work around our neighborhoods. But just want to, hopefully we can get into that on a PD conversation in the or maybe something with council, but it's pretty important. Happy to talk further if anyone has some inquiry. I'm definitely not the expert, but I've been trying to keep up with it. So thanks for a minute to share.
Yeah, I think we definitely need to see an update as we get into some more of the details. So many groups, including our own I-26 Connector Aesthetics Committee, have been told, wait until the design build, wait until the design build. So we'll need some updates.
Okay, the next, I'm sorry.
That's it, Rachel. I was just gonna go ahead.
The next committee agenda to cover is environment and safety, and I'll let Deborah cover that.
All right, thank you, Rachel. Environment and Safety Committee meets on May 20th at 1 o'clock. This is actually a week ahead of our normal scheduled meetings. We had some attendance conflicts, so this is the date that we've chosen. There are 3 items on the agenda, all for information. We will have an update on the Noise Advisory Board from them. Vice Chair Jessica Thomason will be providing that presentation. The next item would be actually an update from staff on noise ordinance implementation and some potential consideration of future ordinance changes. And again, no action. This will just be for information, and consideration of those future ordinance changes will be taken over the next, for consideration over the next several months. And then the last item will be an update on the Asheville Parks and Recreation Comprehensive Plan. And B. Tyrell McGirt, Parks Director, will be providing that update for us. And unlike other committees, there are 2 opportunities for public comment at our meetings, both at the beginning and start of that committee meeting and at the end of the committee meeting. And that is what we have for environment and safety.
Thank you, Deborah. So May 21st, we've got both Housing and Community Development Committee as well as Equity and Engagement Committee meeting. The Housing and Community Development Committee agenda really only has one substantive item, and that is a status update on the affordable housing plan. where the committee will be hearing from Jira Smith with Enterprise. He's going to give a comprehensive overview on where they are in the development of the updated plan, with a targeted focus on policy considerations for the land use incentive grant policy, as well as down payment assistance. And this is really going to serve as a precursor to that June 25th City Council work session, where full council will have a more detailed conversation with Enterprise, their findings and their recommendations. And then ultimately the plan itself is scheduled to be completed later this summer. So then for the Equity and Engagement Committee, there are two key agenda items. First will be the Standing Reparations Commission update from Salah. Part of that will include recaps from the May 6th as well as the May 13th Community Reparations Commission. So the May 6th meeting, which just occurred earlier this week, was virtual. May 13th meeting will be in person at Harrah's. Also, as part of her update, Salah will be covering the April 27th Reparations Jamboree, just providing updates on the impact that that had, results that they got from additional community engagement that occurred. The other key item on the Equity and Engagement Committee agenda is going to be an update on the disparity study from our new Asheville Business Inclusion Manager, Marcus Kirkman, which I'm sure is a familiar name for many of you. He was recently promoted into that role from our Department of Equity and Inclusion. He and Rachel Taylor, our Economic Development Division Manager, are going to talk through the implementation plan for our ABI program, ABI policy and disparity study. And then they're also going to provide some additional updates on the team's approach to providing organizational and community support for our Asheville Business Inclusion Program. So we'll move into our review of the 8-week agenda. We do have a lot of really important budget bond related items on the docket for the next several weeks. May 28th, I'll just note under consent, there's a resolution supporting 2 NCDOT projects. One is a spot safety project to construct sidewalks along sections of Smoky Park Highway, and then a spot mobility project to extend the southbound right turn lane on US 25 at NC 146, which is Long Shoals Road. There's also a contract with a firm to conduct our solid waste master planning effort, which of course was approved with the fiscal year 2024 budget. And then under the city manager's report for May 28th, there's a quarterly CIP update. This will be led by Jay Dundas, but will also include updates from a few other departments outside of just capital projects. And then last but certainly not least, May 28th is also the meeting where the budget public hearing will occur. Moving on to June 11th, again, as a quick reminder, that meeting will take place at Harrah's and it is currently scheduled to begin at 5 p.m. The meeting will include the public hearing for 767 New Haw Creek. And then under unfinished business, there are 2 big items. One, of course, will be budget adoption, and then the final reading for the Business Improvement District. June 25th, again, we've already noted that there will be a work session starting at 3 p.m. in the council chambers on affordable housing. And then I'll just note that that is the night that you will be setting the public hearing on the bond as well as the bond order. So that concludes our 8-week agenda. And now we can move on to our other items, and I can turn it over to Deborah, Taylor, and Tony for the budget overview.
Okay, Rachel, thank you. We have had numerous conversations about the budget, and I am pleased to say that we have taken a lot of time. We've been extremely intentional and deliberative in terms of touching base with council, touching base with the community, touching base with staff to ensure that we were capturing community needs, but also our organizational needs in terms of how do we deliver the most efficient, effective, and impactful services that we could. But as you all know, things are a little different for us from a revenue perspective, and we've tried to take that in context as we have prepared this budget for the upcoming fiscal year. What we wanted to do today is to just provide you all with just a brief overview of the manager's budget. Hopefully, there will be no surprises, again, because we have had lots of conversations about what the manager was intending and staff were intending to present. So as part of this overview, Taylor's probably going to do most of the heavy lifting, and Tony will be joining him. I'm going to start with just the key takeaways. Next slide, please. So this fiscal year proposed budget totals $249.6 million, and it will include generally, and Taylor and Tony will go into a little bit of detail, but obviously this will be a high-level presentation, and all of the details will not be presented today. We will save that for our presentation on Tuesday. But this budget includes a focus on employee compensation and benefits. And I know that there is a lot of concern from the community about Asheville Police Department's pay, but considering where we are from a financial perspective, the manager's budget will reflect what we think is a fair compensation for all of our employees. Strategic utilization of fund balance to advance council's priorities, to balance the budget and avoid increases to the property tax rate. So essentially, the manager's budget does not include an adjustment to the property tax rate. Continued funding for essential community services in a time of rising costs. I've said on numerous occasions, inflation has hit us the way that it has impacted the lives of people who live in this community, work, and do business. And finally, our recommendations include a $75 million general obligation bond, a referendum that will provide additional resources to address the city's infrastructure needs. So essentially, we have tried to address majority of our operational challenges as well as infrastructure needs for the community. And so at this time, I will turn it over to Taylor, and we'll take any questions at any point that you have them, but we have left time for discussion at the end of the presentation. So Taylor, I think you're up first.
Thanks, Deborah. Good morning, everybody. Move on to the summary. As Deborah mentioned, our total budget is just under $250 million. You can see changes from the current year adopted there. Most of those changes are reflective of in the enterprise funds, some fee adjustments that were approved for water and parking and stormwater. Specifically in the general fund, we had an increase to the sanitation fee as well. And then, kind of our general property tax increase that we see every year, growth in the property tax base. We don't have what we have seen in the last few years, which is a pretty big increase in our sales tax revenue. As we've told you all through this budget process, that's really kind of tapered off. So we've scaled that back quite a bit, but that's kind of the high level, at least on the revenue side of our total budget. Did want to make note, as Deborah mentioned, we're not recommending a change in the property tax. So we do have those three fees that hit all households in the city. So I'm going to give you all sort of an idea of what that looks like. It's a $20 impact on sort of our typical household user. I will mention again, as we did in the fees and charges adoption, we did have some more significant changes on our commercial users for water. So just wanted to acknowledge that. On salaries and benefits, we are recommending a 4.11 increase for all staff that will meet the pledged rate, living wage rate that Just Economics has published. We also have increases in our state mandated employer retirement contribution. So that's the city's contribution to retirement system. We also, as we've mentioned, have some additional employer contributions to cover rising healthcare costs. And then we are also looking at reinstating a retiree health benefit. It will not be the same as the previous one, but we are looking at a new benefit for that. We do also have a number, a little over 31 new positions that are part of the recommended budget. I will say, as you can see here, that over most of those positions, 20 some of those positions are in enterprise funds and are directly related to revenue growth, fee increases, that kind of thing. We do have a handful, kind of those first three on the left, that are in the general fund. The community responder program is in part funded through opioid settlement resources. So that one is in the general fund, but again, has some other funding attached to it. And we'll go into some of the detail about some of these program enhancements in just a minute. So in summary, again, the financial summary here, proposed budget includes an appropriation of $7.75 million of fund balance. And we think, based on our current estimates, that will put us at around 13.3%, which is, under, but not dramatically under your 15% policy. Again, we're focusing on compensation for employees, meeting that pledged living wage in an equitable way that avoids compression issues in our organization, and then making sure that we're maintaining our existing services and investing in strategic enhancements aligned with council priorities. So again, shifting into just highlighting a few of those new investments. One, you all are probably familiar with the community responder program. We are actually, that program's really been run within our existing budget. For the current year, started out as a pilot last summer. So this will fully fund 5 firefighter positions, as well as 2 peer support positions that will continue that program, addressing quality of life, including mental health, physical health, substance abuse, and homelessness. We also have a couple positions and some licensing and software related costs for APD, the police department, for a drone support program. And again, that's really just to allow them to fully utilize that new technology and using that to decrease response time, provide some real-time intelligence, and overall improve public safety. We also have, speaking of public safety, some upgrades that we need to make to our public safety radio system. So this is actually in our IT department, but is really related to that system and making sure that it continues to function, and that we're on the latest version of that. We have some additional funding for transit operations to ensure that we have some support, some technical expertise to get us through the RFP bid process and selection for our transit operations and maintenance contract, which is our transit service provider essentially. And then again, we have added an additional staff person for yard waste and breast collection that is in the general fund, but offset by that fee increase for sanitation. Moving into our enterprise funds, we have an additional crew in our stormwater fund, and that's going to be dedicated to preventative maintenance and repairs, and really help stormwater to make sure that they're able to keep up with our street resurfacing projects and replacing infrastructure ahead of those. That certainly will become more important, assuming that our general obligation bonds pass and we increase that amount of resurfacing that we're doing after November. We also have a couple positions for development review and stormwater. And then we don't talk a lot about our street cut fund, our kind of utility partner program, but we are bringing on a new partner, Duke Energy, into that. And so we're adding a crew that will be focused on concrete repairs, so sidewalk repairs, to make sure that we're able to manage that additional workload and improve our existing service as it relates to the street cut fund. Councilmember Rennie.
Specifically around the Duke Energy, so we're going to partner providing more support. Are they going to partner in providing more funding?
Yeah, so the street cut fund is fully funded by the partners, and I'm probably going to not get the full list, but the water fund is a partner in that fund because they make quite a few street cuts, as is stormwater. And then it is also, Duke's coming, and then it's the other utility providers. Go ahead, Ben.
It's water, stormwater, MSD, and I believe AT&T.
I think that's right.
So Duke would be the fifth participant in that enterprise fund program.
And essentially all of the costs of that program get billed back out to those partners based on kind of the work required to address the cuts that they're making to either or a combination of street, so asphalt repair, and then sidewalks, concrete repair.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure we were partner meant funding too.
Yep. Thank you. So moving on, again, you all have previously approved some increases to rates in the water fund, and we are adding, those are primarily to address, which I'll mention a little bit later, some of the capital needs that they have, but we are making some operational changes as well. Both of these items are also a continuation of to implement the recommendations from the review committee. The first one there being really focused on capital projects and having more ability to manage those projects, especially for the pumping, storage, and treatment facilities. And then also a new crew that's dedicated to system maintenance, so the distribution system piece in South Asheville, where we don't actually have folks dedicated to that area currently. So that's, again, a brief, quick summary of our operating, and it looks like there might be a question from Councilmember Turner before I shift into capital improvement program.
Please, yes, thank you. Nice to see you, Taylor. So I guess I'm a little surprised. And this was one of the questions about new positions I had sent in the kind of budget questions. So I'm surprised to get information about so many new positions this far into the process. But I guess what would help me is if we could get a breakdown on which of those are covered by enterprise fees we've already addressed and which are going to be part of our general fund spending so we can know the impact to the budget and like dollar amounts.
Sure. And I will say again, quickly, looking at this list, so everything on the right-hand side is all enterprise fund.
Okay.
On the left-hand side, the water, those positions are also enterprise fund, of course. The sanitation driver, which is in the general fund, is funded by the increases or the increase to the sanitation fee. And then the AFD positions, the community responder program, are partially funded through opioid settlement funds. So we'll have all of that will be detailed out in the budget document, which we'll be sending out to you all and for the public tomorrow.
That'll help. Thank you. I guess those dollar amounts matter because in my brain, I'm thinking, whoa, we're going into our savings to just afford the personnel costs of trying to get everyone to living wage. But now we're also talking about growing staff. So I'm trying to wrap my head around this. The numbers will help.
Sure.
Thanks.
I think Councilmember Ullman was the next to raise her hand.
Yeah, similar to Sage, just wanting to kind of understand where the math comes in on this, and for a similar reason. Like you just referenced, Taylor, like I remember us talking about the community responder program having opioid dollars and maybe even dogwood dollars. And so for me to under the budget and consider going into savings, it does make me wonder, are there some of these general fund programs that we hold off on this year? Or is there something of the way the dollars balance that looks different? But that does raise a question for me. They're really understanding, if we pause on some of the programmatic expansion in the general fund, does it get us to a place where we don't have to go in our savings? And I don't know the answer, but just kind of understanding some of the numbers. I know you all have the depth, but if I could get into it with you, it would help me as I discern.
Sure. And again, we'll certainly have lots of numbers in the budget document, the proposed budget document, which again will be posted tomorrow.
Thank you, Ms. Riley.
Yeah, I guess I should echo concern that we're seeing this expansion when we said we weren't going to be able to do anything new. And I, have held back the reminder. So now I'm going to lift it up, that we have twice now recommended increased strategic partnership funds to address the opportunity gap in our schools. That need is growing need in our community. But we have 2 recommendations from the Equity and Engagement Committee outstanding. And we were told that we don't have a staff recommendation. We had to wait for the budget. So I'm just kind of like struggling with the fact that we're dipping into savings and doing more when we're not yet considering the flat amount raises yet to the extent that we could have. So yeah, I shared the same concern and how we're going to communicate this to the public when we're dipping into the savings, essentially putting off a property tax rate until next year.
So Taylor, if I could, the items regarding some of the user fee type of fee-based were discussed with the committee when we were discussing proposed proposed fee increases and what those increases would be used for. And so apologize if that information obviously maybe just didn't carry through, considering the number of meetings that we had around the budget. We've been talking about the community responder program and the need for it to address the issue of the unhoused, to respond to our continued effort around reimagining public safety. And so that is the reason for, and again, a lot of this was discussed in committee. And I think we discussed it also, maybe didn't give you all as much detail about the numbers, but I think we did, but we will definitely maybe even provide some additional information to you before the presentation on Tuesday. I think Ms. Turner and then Ms. Rowley.
Yeah. Thank you, Deborah. That's helpful. I'm less surprised by the ones like around the water and stuff, because I do recall talking about the fee increases and more positions. I'm just surprised that we're seeing this now instead of maybe in the formative first parts of budgeting discussions. But here's maybe what would help me better understand. I sent in a bunch of those questions around like, how did we get these large growth in departments over a couple recent budget cycles? And that was in our follow-up document. And I think what I'm struggling with is, right now, in this budget cycle, we are talking about using our savings because looking backwards, we weren't ready to maintain the employment growth that we knew was coming. So it's almost like if we're going to do this, I need to know how far out we can handle it. Like, are we going to be in this same situation next year where we're going to have to dip into fund balance or hope for a reval and adjusting rates because we technically can't afford our personnel as it stands? Like, that's the concern I'm worried about building. We're doing it this year. It's making me uncomfortable to go into our savings. But if we're creating an environment where we always have to do that, it's just not sustainable. So adding positions, I love more community responders. Like, I appreciate and know that we need these, but I need to know that we can sustain it over many years, not just 1 year at a time. Does that make sense, that request? I don't know how we get there, but I'm concerned we'll just continually be in this boat if we handle it like this.
And I would suggest, and maybe I am speaking out of turn, but Taylor, can you address that the growth and the need to dip into fund balance? Yes, we need to pay our existing employees. The majority of the growth in personnel will be funded through fees. And if there is any growth, even with APD and AFD, these are existing positions and they are trading off. For example, the APD is trading off sworn positions for the APD drone program.
So it's not a headcount growth, it's a reappropriation.
That is
okay,
correct.
that's what I understand.
Yes, possibly except for
The community
community responders.
Yeah, and I know Ms. Councilmember Maroney has her hand raised, and I'll just to quickly jump in and echo what Taylor and Ms. Campbell have said. It's really in terms of the general fund positions that are being added that are not funded through a fee or opioid money. It's really the two APD drone, and then that other one that's a really small amount. And I just want to highlight that one if I can quickly, because that's a public safety radio manager position. And there's an existing position right now in AFD that's part-time that does that type of work. APD asked for a full-time position, which we couldn't fund. And so those two departments got together and partnered and decided we could upgrade this part-time position to full-time and meet the needs of both departments. And so I think that's been a great example as we've kind of finished out the budget process in the last couple of weeks of departments coming together and collaborating and finding a way to meet their needs. And so again, it's really just those positions, those 2+ positions that are in the general fund that are not funded by, in some way, shape, or form by another funding source. So Councilmember Roney?
Yeah, I guess what would help for not just to add to my understanding, but I think to be able to communicate effectively with the public is the cost for the community responder program versus if we were to partner more effectively to grow the community paramedics program. And the reason I'm concerned about that is essentially the same reason I'm concerned about what's happening with transit or with our school systems is duplication of overhead. So right now I know we're pulling folks off of fire trucks to put them into a different role. But I have the same concern about longevity of strategic planning. And I appreciate that the meeting that we requested earlier this spring with the new police and fire chiefs is going to be set in June, but that's really too late to have this conversation. So I hope we're not waiting until next year to have that. But if we had a deeper understanding of what the current and long-term cost is for this obvious need, because I definitely want to support sending the right person with the right tools and training, it would help to know what the comparison costs would be to instead partner with the county because they oversee health and human services and already have an established program.
Any other questions? I
will add one more thing. I sent a ABC board liaison report. I don't do this very often, but I think this one's really important to re-highlight now during our budget conversation. As you know, I'm the liaison to the ABC board, and those meetings are not archived or recorded. So you would have to wait a whole month to see the minutes, but there is a projection to have our distribution checks be smaller because they are also seeing their expenses outpace revenue. There's two parts to this. One, because of the estimation being around sports betting being legal in North Carolina, it was a significant amount of spending in North Carolina. It was like $600 million in the first month. It was pretty large. So it's anticipated that folks are readjusting household budgets, and that may be why our ABC revenue, instead of just being exponentially higher every month, is flat. It's flat across North Carolina. So we're only projecting a 1% growth in revenue, but the staffing needs, especially if we're going to continue to provide quality services with our ABC board, and our ABC stores to provide the high expectation we have around safety and public engagement, public education, then we have to recruit and retain people. So there's a projected 6.5% growth in their pay plan. Now they have a much smaller staff, but it is going to have an impact on our distribution check. So we'll have a nominal amount projected for our budget, the checks that we receive. I don't have an exact number on that yet, but that number is coming soon. Once again, I sent that ABC board liaison report to all the council members in the city manager's office.
I appreciate you mentioning that, Councilmember Roney. We also got a memo from the general manager of the ABC board as well to kind of update us, and we factored that into our revenue projections for next year. So I think we're good there.
Thank you, Tony.
Okay, Taylor.
All right, yeah, we'll move on to capital. So just briefly kind of highlighting our regular 5-year capital plan that we present as part of the proposed budget. In the general capital plan, it's really a continuation of the existing program with minimal changes. Essentially, we add on a new year every year, but as of right now, we're very status quo in that program based on the resources available. In the water, as I mentioned earlier, most of that revenue from the improved fee increases we are going to utilize to start addressing, I say specifically start addressing the $240 million of identified maintenance needs in the distribution and system and water treatment plants. And then, as you all know from the presentation of the assessment on the parking garages in fall of last year, we have some significant needs there to the tune of $11.3 million. So some, again, increases in the capital investments in the parking capital fund as well. So moving on to the general obligation bond, staff's recommendation is that we do two $75 million each, one in 2024 and one in 2028. We think this is a meaningful, impactful, but achievable amount for staff to execute on, a reasonable taxpayer burden, and also maintains a safe amount of debt per capita. More specifically, the categories that we are recommending include housing at $25 million, transportation at $20 million, parks and recreation at 15, and public safety facilities at 15, again, for that total of $75 million. And then just some examples of the types of items that we'd be funding in each of those categories. As we did with the 2016 bond, for the housing, we would utilize our housing trust fund, which assists in creating diverse and affordable housing choices across the city, and then also implement recommendations that we'll get from the forthcoming affordable housing plan. In parks and recreation, again, similar to 2016, we will be looking at making improvements to existing facilities and parks, land acquisition for new or expanded facilities, investments in aquatic facilities, and then again we have a forthcoming plan, the Recreate Asheville plan, that will help us to prioritize some of those investments as well. In transportation, again similar to 2016, in road improvements and resurfacing, sidewalk improvements, especially items that are recommended in the GAP plan and address ADA concerns and challenges, transportation safety projects, again, kind of a Venn diagram of things there, and greenways as well. And then finally, the new item, new category, wasn't part of 2016, public safety facilities, which would include maintenance and upgrade of our existing facilities, potentially land acquisition for new facilities. And then again, we have our comprehensive facility study that you all got a presentation on, and making sure that we're making investments that align with those items. So again, summarizing here, we are not, there's not a requirement that we provide an itemized list of projects for the ballot, but we will certainly be bringing additional information about projects that would be included to you all over the course of the actions that you have to take, which Rachel mentioned earlier, but again, kind of hitting the May and 2 June meetings. There's some required actions to get those these bond orders on the ballot. And then the city manager's office, CAPE, and finance staff will continue to share information with you all and with the community, making sure that we have all of that information out for folks in advance of the November 2024 vote. So to wrap up, again, proposed budget at your formal council meeting on Tuesday, then we'll have the public hearing at the subsequent meeting, and then adoption at the first meeting in June. And our key takeaways again, budget just under $250 million that focuses on compensation, strategically utilizes fund balance to avoid a tax rate increase and balance the budget, continues to fund essential community services, and our recommendation of a $75 million general obligation bond referendum in November. Councilmember Turner.
Thank you, Taylor. So one of our budget follow-up documents, I'm realizing it might have just been data included because of a request from council, but at one point there was a tax rate, potential increase in taxes to cover our budget shortfalls. Staff is recommending using fund balance, not a tax increase. Is that correct? From that, that's what I understood from the presentation. So that was just data in one of our question documents. Okay. I would be curious to know, because we talk about these fund balance and percentages so often, but not dollars. I would be curious to know how much we could dip into fund balance and cover our costs, but still stay at 15%, and what that remaining difference would be. And I'm just so I have the information and can assess my comfortableness with this, and whether or not we need to look at a tax increase to stay at 15. And alongside that, it would be really helpful if maybe Brad, or if a slide was made that says, what is the impact when a city goes below this recommended 15%? Does it impact our bond ratings, our credit ratings? What is that impact? Should we be aware of anything that we may not already know by dipping below that 15%? Because I don't feel fully aware of those impacts, and it would be helpful to understand if that is the direction we're being asked to go.
Councilmember Turner, the 15% is a policy. It's not law. And so it is at you all's discretion. And as we noted, it is slightly below. And a lot of that. And what I'd like to do is to also provide you all with a breakdown of, as we look at fund balance, and we're saying 7.75 or whatever that number is in order to balance the budget, what will be needed. How are those percentages allocated? And a lot of that allocation is for towards employee compensation, because that's half of our operating budget. And if I'm saying anything inaccurate, Tony or Taylor, please chime in.
No, not at all. I think you was well said, Ms. Campbell, and Councilmember Turner. I think you hit on kind of some of the things that we think about when we think about fund balance too, because again, it is our policy at 15%. You all can certainly go below. The concerns do start to be, our comparison to our peers, and when the debt rating agencies start looking at us in comparison to our peers and kind of where we're at. And so that's really the main concern, is you start to dip kind of below that 15%. And then also the local government commission is looking at that as well. And again, comparing us to our peers across the state as well. And so that's those are kind of the financial concerns that you start to look at once you start to dip down. And they also look at trends too. And so we've shown over the last 10 years, y'all seen that graph in many of our presentations, where we've been very successful in maintaining our fund balance within 15 to 20%. So if a debt rating agency or the LGC were to see a 1 year drop, that's not going to raise alarms. What it concerns them is when they see it consistently dropping over time, or consistently going up over time. Because if it's consistently going up, that means you're underutilizing your available revenue. And so it's those kinds of trends that folks really kind of look at and get concerned about. And so I don't think they're going to see that with this 1 year dip, but we can definitely bring you all back that information you're asking for, Councilmember Turner, about how much we would need to put into fund balance to get us back to that 15%.
That would be really helpful. And I think just even having the slide that shares that will be helpful for the community, and just for the conversation, because not everybody watches these agenda briefings where we discuss it, and I think it's important to have that as part of the overall presentation. And again, like we were just talking about with the new positions, the looming question is, will we be in this position again next year? And so for our long-term planning and sustainable financial management, are we facing a situation with growing personnel costs that might show several years of dips in here? I don't know. I can't wrap my brain around that quite yet. So it just makes me nervous. I've lost a lot of sleep over this budget cycle. That information will help. Thank you. I just want to make sure to thank you all.
We've also lost some sleep as well.
Yeah, I'm sure. This is the hardest budget session I feel like I've been through. And but I want to make sure to thank you all too. I know I asked a lot of questions for budget follow-up information, and a lot of time was invested. And I really appreciate it because it is helping me understand the long-term planning that we are responsible for. And just thank you for that extra time and information.
And thank you, Councilmember Turner, for your concern. And please don't feel that we feel when you all ask us questions about the budget that we're insulted, we're whatever. Both council's role, this is one of the most important roles that you have, is the budget and managing resources in a responsible way. It's the same for me in terms of my role as a city manager, is to ensure that we are managing public resources in a responsible manner and looking at the growth of our organization, particularly from an employee perspective. What I can say emphatically is that we are probably an organization that is woefully under-resourced in terms of employees and employee needs. And so we appreciate you all listening to this high level. We will try to provide you all with the additional detailed information, and we will certainly incorporate it into our presentation on Tuesday, but we'll try to get back to you all as we normally do as part of our follow-up on Monday, for sure, or early Tuesday morning, to make sure that you all have the most up-to-date information about the budget. With that, I think we can, if there are no further questions on the budget, we can move to the next item, which is the TDA Project Development Fund application. I think Jamie is going to provide you all with information. And this is, again, an update and an opportunity for us to leverage a community resource as it relates to infrastructure that's needed in our community. So I will turn it over to Jamie.
Thank you, Deborah, and good afternoon, Council. As Deborah said, I'm here to just give you an update on where we are in the TDA grant process. So next slide, Katie. So I'll start with some key takeaways. Again, the TDA grants are used to leverage funds for tourism-related capital projects. And our goal is, consistent to align our capital needs and the allowable uses for TDA grant funding. The legislation a couple of years ago created two different funds, the TPDF and the Legacy Investment from Tourism Fund. These grants support governments and nonprofit agencies, and we continue to work closely with the TDA and other partners to plan projects. We're currently in phase 1 of the TPDF cycle, with the applications due May 15th. Next slide. So just a reminder of what the two different funds purposes are. The Tourism Product Development Fund is for major capital tourism projects to increase patronage and lodging facilities. The LIFT Fund, created 2 years ago, provides a little more flexibility on uses. It is still tourism-related capital projects, but the uses have been expanded to these listed here for maintenance, design, rehab, and infrastructure needs. Next slide. So the last couple cycles of TPDF and LIFT funding, this is what the city has been awarded. You can see in the last TPDF cycle, they're awarded for Harrah's and of course the McCormick Field Major Works funding. The LIFT funding, which was just recently announced, provided infrastructure and maintenance for Harrah's, $2.9 million for Cox Avenue, which is more than we were awarded in that first application for Cox that moved over to McCormick. So we're very pleased and thankful for that. And also some design and rebuild of tennis courts at Aston Park. Next slide. So this TPDF cycle, and reminder, these are major tourism capital projects. We'll be applying for the Bowcatcher Greenway project. I have an estimated amount here. We're still working on some scoping and finding where the matching funds will be. And then JBL parking and network improvements. Next slide. So here again is a list of some of the projects that we are hoping to align with funding in the next LIFT and TPDF cycles. We'll be meeting with the TDA to discuss some of these and how we can align these projects moving forward. Next slide. So again, the key takeaways. We have TPDF cycle coming up, first phase applications coming up soon. So we're working hard to get those applications that I mentioned in by the May 15th. Yes, Sage.
So May 15th in 6 days. So this is the only opportunity for us to weigh in?
Yes, before the first phase of the application, yes.
Can you go back a slide, please?
Sure.
This feels so last minute. So do you all want input from us?
Yes, we sort of have shared these long-term goals for TPDF. I think we were with you guys in November, but of course we'd like to hear input.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's just short notice for me, but one thing that comes to mind that I see on this list are these parking garage improvements.
Mm-hmm.
Primarily because the $11 million in repairs and the unsustainable effort that fund helps the transit fund. And, the transit of $2.5 million of our fund balance used or planning this budget is around transit, and it's unsustainable financial model currently. But if we can get TPDF money that helps cover some of the improvements or repairs at the decks, then that would make the strain on that enterprise fund supporting transit less. And I'm curious if that is something you all are thinking about. It looked like just Greenway and a little bit of.
Right, and that's yes, and that's for this cycle right now for TPDF. We have a meeting coming up with the TDA where we're going to talk about these projects. It's just not, it's our call that the parking garage improvements don't fully align with the allowable uses for the TPDF fund, but could possibly better align with the LIFT funding applications or even a major works project. So the parking garage improvements are a priority for us for TDA funding. It's just finding that right fit.
Understandable. And maybe what would help me is if we had a multi-year kind of outline of a plan for these kind of things, like what are we targeting? Because obviously I-26 is a one and done kind of opportunity. I would love for us to all weigh in on this. It just sounds like there isn't time now because it's in 6 days. But
the only thing that's in 6 days is, can you go back to the other slide, Jane?
yeah, maybe I'm confused.
Yes.
Sound like applications are due on the 15th?
Right. This is the only thing that is due for this
kind of broad thing.
This particular
might do
application.
these ideas.
That's
Okay.
correct. The next slide is upcoming, where we will, can you go to the next slide, Katie, please? I think you went backwards.
Yeah.
Go forward.
Forward.
There you go. Okay. These are things that are in consideration. We actually will be meeting with TDA staff, with the county, trying to get a collective kind of priority of things that we would want for the different types of funding opportunities, because you can do certain things based on either LIFT or major works or PPDF. So these are just examples of things that we will be talking to them about, and as well as you all about.
Yeah, and I'll just add that the TPDF and LIFT funding cycles are twice a year now. So they're constantly going, and we'll be constantly working, like I said, to plan with the TDA to find the right fit for these projects that are priorities for us.
I get that. I guess I just need to understand the broader picture and longer planning, because like this is the only opportunity that lodging tax and the city of Asheville interact, right? And it's such a tempestuous subject in the community. And so for us to pursue certain projects, seems like some input ought to go into that in my mind. And I know we're limited in what it can fund and their cycles, but I would love to be able to better understand all those cycles and what our like 3 to 5 year plan is, just so we could, collect input and get on the same page on it.
Yep. And we also rely heavily on our CIP and what's prioritized within that for these projects. Councilwoman.
Yeah, Ms. Smith.
Councilwoman Roney, do you have a question?
Councilmember Mosley had her hand up before me.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Councilwoman Mosley.
Okay, thanks, Kim. So I'm wondering about our community engagement, specifically regarding the Bowcatcher Greenway. And I'm bringing that up now because it'll give us an opportunity to perhaps do more. Because from what I understand, a couple of neighborhood association meetings ago with East End, this subject was brought up from someone not from the city. And there was a great deal of consternation. So I would hate for us to move forward with making a request and then on the back end find out that the neighborhood directly involved is not in support.
Yes, and I talked to transportation staff around that. Some outreach has happened, but we will have to do more outreach through this process.
More specifically, I'll just reveal that it sounded like they were adamantly opposed.
Councilwoman Roney?
Thank you for lifting that up, Antoinette. I share the same concerns. We don't want to be asking for something and having it on the on deck list if, in fact, we haven't matched it with the community engagement. And I guess that points for me something that might just help, like once again, for our benefit, but also for public benefit. If we had something alongside this on deck list, the way that you have the ADA sidewalks tied to the GAP plan. If there was some way to point to the fact that we've already done engagement on this, we have like a touchback way to engage. Parking garage improvements, it would be a different kind of like a capital improvement project list. And you could point it back to community input on infrastructure concerns, or the number of times we've had, the outreach around the budget, or what does the city do well? We just had that huge citywide survey, right? So like something where we can point to like, this has already received engagement, or this area needs more engagement. And if it's already received engagement, like say the Hill Street 240 pedestrian bridges, where that engagement has already happened, because it can help us know where we need to either check receipts or make sure that we're following up with neighborhoods. That way, when they ask us, why didn't you come back and ask us for input on this, we can point to where it did happen or where people can continue to engage.
Yes, we can do that. Thank you. All right, if there's no other questions, I'll turn it back over to Rachel.
Thank you, Jamie. And so the last item we have slated for today's agenda is Emily Ball is going to provide a quick overview of the 2024 point in time count results.
Good afternoon. As Rachel said, here to share information about the 2024 point in time count results. I am actually going to share the exact same slides that we presented to our brand new Continuum of Care membership body at their meeting on April 25th. And again, to HIAC this morning, the Homeless Initiative Advisory Committee. Sorry, I just realized my camera was not on. That we presented this morning to the Homeless Initiative Advisory Committee as our outgoing Continuum of Care board. As you all are familiar with, every Continuum of Care in the country is required to conduct a point in time count during the last 10 days in January every 2 years. In our community, we traditionally do this every year. The count includes people in emergency shelters, transitional housing, and people who are unsheltered. We submit those results to the federal government, to HUD, and they are compiled to inform federal strategy and to report to Congress in the annual homeless assessment report. Notably, in the last annual homeless assessment report in 2023, based on 2023 point in time data, there was a 12% increase in homelessness nationally. You know that participation in the point in time count is voluntary, and the data set is absolutely imperfect, but it can show us trends to help inform COC decision making going forward. We have had a lot of conversation in our community about continuing to improve HMIS data collection, and as that continues to happen, the COC will be able to review more accurate real-time data and just be less dependent on point-in-time results for information about homelessness in our community. The count is conducted on the last Tuesday in January, includes both Tuesday evening and Wednesday morning, and agencies that participate in HMIS don't do anything additional. We can pull that data directly from HMIS. Agencies that don't conduct paper surveys with folks who stay with them on that night. And then we have teams of volunteers that canvass the community to conduct the unsheltered count. All of the surveys are entered by our team into HMIS, where they're deduplicated and aggregated, de-identified, and then we submit those results to HUD. A bit of context, if we look at the last 5 years of data, point-in-time count data for our community, our totals ranged in the 500 numbers. Lowest number was 527 and highest was 637 over the past few years. Importantly, if you look at the 2019 and 2020 data, both of those reflect really what is our pre-pandemic baseline. Those were sort of business as usual numbers for us prior to the pandemic. And you can see notably that during the pandemic, shelter and transitional housing beds decreased substantially. So in 2019, we had 502 people in shelter and transitional housing. Last year, we only had 402. So we lost about 100 beds in the community during the pandemic. At the same time, of course, the number of people who were unsheltered increased from 78 to 171 people identified last year. We know the point in time count is limited, but we want to have better and better data all the time because that will help us inform better and better strategy. So some improvements that we've had over the past couple years in our methodology are really specific to the unsheltered count. The sheltered count should be quite reliable. That is data coming directly from shelters and transitional housing programs. The unsheltered count, quite variable. 2021 and earlier, we just didn't have clear organization of street teams or areas that they covered. And we were conducting the street count on the last Wednesday of the month and then a day after count at AHOPE to ask folks where they slept the night before. The last couple of years, we expanded that methodology, developing a plan with street outreach staff. We added volunteer registration, street team assignments, maps to improve clarity about areas to cover. And we transitioned to a Tuesday night count so that in addition to counting folks at AHOPE the day after, we could also count folks at Haywood Street on Wednesdays to ask where they slept the night before, since Haywood Street is such a hub of activity at their regular Wednesday gathering. So using that approach, if we had used the same approach that we have used the last couple of years, this is what our point in time data would have been for 2024. That bottom line would have shown 520 people. Again, that is a reliable number because that's coming directly from shelters and transitional housing programs. Would have shown 117 people who were unsheltered, and then a total of 637 people experiencing homelessness. So had we used the same approach as the last couple of years, we would have shown a significant decrease in the unsheltered count back to our 2021 size. Yes.
So that's confusing to me because it sounds like you're saying the previous methodology was flawed. But had we not been flawed, it would have been this. But from a statistical standpoint, if your baseline is flawed, you can't make an accurate comparison. So how can you say what it would have been if what you did was flawed to begin with?
So this number, the next couple of slides may answer your question. I'm not sure, but this number is if we had just done our exact same approach as last year. So if we had done a Tuesday night count only and a Wednesday A-Hope and Haywood Street count only, then these are the numbers we would have shown. So if we're thinking about point in time data and kind of an apples to apples comparison, these are our apples to apples numbers. We would have seen that we had decreased unsheltered homelessness compared to the prior year.
And I guess my point is that you don't know, there's no way to know what would have been because bad data in gets bad data out. And so to compare bad data is a null result.
Yes. And this, so when we collect data in the point in time count, I know that you participated on one of those street count teams. When folks come back with their surveys for staff, then we're tracking how many surveys came back from which team, so we know exactly where those surveys came from. So that 117 that you see on this slide is looking only at the surveys that we got back from Tuesday evening teams and then Wednesday at A-Hope and Haywood Street. That's the same data collection points that we had last year.
Which would have been bad data.
Yeah, and we know that point in time data is limited and that we just have not been connecting with every unsheltered person in our community, nor will we ever be able to connect with every unsheltered person in the community for the point in time count. It's just not possible that we will be able to find all those folks on that night. But what I want, and what we want, I think, in our community is good data. So we want to do a better and better job at that data collection so that we have the most accurate information. So for this year's count, we really expanded our methodology to your point about, we know that we have missed people in the past and have better opportunities to do a better job of a more thorough count. This year, we expanded the planning group so that in addition to the outreach staff that we did last year, we also included peer support specialists, public safety staff, and HIAC members. And really for me, this is the continuum of care approach. This is really inviting folks with deep expertise to the table to be sure that we have the best information possible to make the best plan possible. The result of that is that we significantly expanded our methodology and functionally doubled our effort to count people who were unsheltered. So we doubled the street count. In addition to what we have always done on the evening of, we did the exact same process the day after. So we did street counts throughout the community on Wednesday. So doubling the number of folks who were out connecting with people who were unsheltered. Some of the feedback that we got during that planning process from folks with lived experience is that it's really uncomfortable to be approached by a stranger after dark and asked for personal information. And people might be more likely to engage during the daytime when they feel safer. And also that people are mobile at different times through the day, which is true of all of us. And so people's activity patterns vary. If we do the same count in the same locations 2 different times of day, then we're likely to encounter more people. We also added specific campsite outreach from outreach staff. So those are folks who have good relationships with people and are trusted, and added some service locations in the rescue mission and all for ABCCM crisis ministries. I think this is important partly for general improved data collection, but also because I think traditionally in our community, we have done a fairly Asheville-centric count, but our continuum of care geography is actually all of Buncombe County. And so we need to be looking at folks who are homeless throughout the continuum of care. ABCCM crisis ministry locations, they certainly have a downtown location, but the other 3 are outside of the downtown area. And then importantly, we had 129 volunteers participate this year. So that's a 72% increase over the participation that we had in the 2023 count. Just a really robust community effort to get out and connect with folks. And therefore, we identified more people than we otherwise would have for a more accurate count. So the number that we actually identified this year is, again, that 520 is a reliable number from shelters and transitional housing programs. No methodology change there. In the unsheltered count, because we did the expanded methodology, we identified 102 additional people that we would not have found had we just done the same process as last year. So our unsheltered count was 219 people, and then the total there is 739. Go ahead.
I'm just wondering, how are the folks who used to live in the Woodfin counted last year? The ones.
They are housed and not homeless.
Okay, so this year they would have been housed and not homeless as well. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, so this count really specifically follows the federal definition of homelessness. So people in emergency shelter, transitional housing, and who are unsheltered.
Curious, Emily, I mean, you are so embedded with the continuum of care and all of the myriad of partners. Did this data surprise you? Like what was your just reaction based on your wealth of knowledge and your depth of relationship with all the service providers and folks in this condition?
No, I would say did not surprise me. And the feedback that I've heard from providers is the same and is honestly I've heard positive feedback from providers that this feels more reflective of the demand that they experience for their services and not in a way that is a change this year compared to prior years. But I saw some comments in the media about how, providers saying, I've always questioned the point in time count because it seems lower than what I experience every day. And it feels good that this year's data feel more accurate. And that's my own opinion as well.
That's really helpful. I think getting through the differences and understanding the methodology changes it's complex, but I feel like you've understood it well, and just understanding that I've heard that sentiment as well of people saying that can't be the right numbers. And then you go, well, then why do we track data? Because methodology could always be flawed, but it sounds like this methodology improvement is getting closer to what the true story feels like from leaders who are working on this. It's just helpful context from you as a leader. Thank you.
I think that's true. And I think, again, we really want HMIS data to be our primary focus. That is our best opportunity to get more real-time, more accurate data on a daily basis. Point-in-time count is a federal requirement. We will continue to do it. It is useful information for us, but we should not anchor in on this as kind of the truth about homelessness in our community. We can get better data through HMIS as providers participate in that so that we have better clarity throughout the year.
And I know that was like a key recommendation in the study for the continuum of care to take up just how are we doing towards that priority, or has that priority gotten started? What type of progress have we made on that? I know that's kind of off script from the presentation, but I'm not in any of the committees that goes into this. So if you have any info now or otherwise later, I'd love just a sense of that at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll say, I think data quality is really improving, and I would love to give a shout out to Charles Young on our team, who administers the HMIS for our community, has done a really tremendous job of working with providers on improving their use of that system. He's doing annual audits with them now to understand the quality of data that are being put into that system. So I think we are making progress on our data collection in general, and in the new continuum of care, the charter provides for a system performance committee that will oversee HMIS, and we'll really look at what data do we have and not have, and what do we want, and how do we get it, so that that committee can do really meaningful analysis and make recommendations to the board that are informed and data driven. So we're on our way, and we have a lot more work to do, is the upshot. Kim?
Thank you, Emily. I know we just saw this morning at the Homeless Initiative Advisory Committee, and I know there are some questions and concerns that I'll be forwarding in the typical liaison report that I send. Will this be going to a full council meeting soon so that folks might be able to see it on a larger scale than our agenda briefing?
I don't believe so. My understanding is that this is the opportunity to share this information with you all. Again, in addition to really focusing efforts through the continuum of care to make sure that the community has information through that new planning body.
Okay, I think that as we're getting ready to have conversations about a need to disband the Homeless Initiative Advisory Committee, because there's a future recommendation coming forward to this council that we will undo the resolution that established it. It will have to be on an agenda somewhere. And I really think that the point in time count update would be useful on a larger scale, where more folks can get eyes on it and hear some of what we've learned about our methodology. So hopefully it can be on a future agenda. I'll certainly forward that request to the mayor.
All right, I know that I am, as usual, far over my allotted time, so I will move quickly through this, but I think the full slide deck is coming to you all. I'm certainly happy to answer questions. Point in time data, of course, collects demographic information on folks experiencing homelessness in the COC. And so, again, I'll move through this quickly, but gender information, I'm going to just actually go through this very quickly and let you eyeball these slides and flag any questions just out of sensitivity to time, but happy to follow up with any questions. We look at gender information, race information among people experiencing homelessness. This is not just of the unsheltered population, but of the full 739 people identified. Age information, household composition, and then additional characteristics. So we know that we have a very high percentage of folks in our homeless population are veterans in this community. We identified 230 people who were chronically homeless, 31 unaccompanied youth, and 7 parenting youth. And then these last 4 bullets, these I think are historically really underreported by folks when they're answering these questions. So 55 people with serious mental illness, 38 substance use disorder, 4 HIV or AIDS, and 51 survivors of domestic violence. As we have done in the last couple of years, we asked some supplemental questions to folks who were unsheltered specifically. The first was, when you last had housing, was it in Asheville and Buncombe County? 206 people of the 219 unsheltered folks answered that question. 108 said yes and 98 said no. And of people who said no, we asked, if not, where was it that you last had housing? 87 people answered that question. 25 were Western North Carolina, 20 elsewhere in North Carolina, and 42 in another state. And how long have you been in Asheville and Buncombe County? 83 people answered that question and had an average of 6.6 years. One thing we did this year that we have not done in the past was ask people, what is one thing you wish our community understood about homelessness? And for me, this part was really impactful. This is really a wonderful representation of the humanity of people who are suffering and struggling with in housing crisis in our community. This is just a sample of the answers we got, but we got really robust data from that question. People had a lot to share with our community. But some themes are, we are people. We didn't choose this. We are trying our best, but people shun us. The first couple of falls leads to a downward spiral. How hard it is to be poor. Don't be afraid of us. Sometimes we don't feel safe either. It's hard to make it out of here. It can happen to anybody. We aren't trash. It's not easy. It's not our choice. It's scary and hard to not generalize and stereotype. We are desperate and in pain. It's not just a choice people decide to make. It seems impossible to get out. So stressful, asked to leave at any moment. We are real people and we exist. So really, I want to publicly express appreciation to folks who participated in the point in time count by sharing their information with volunteers and staff, so that our community can have a better understanding of the experience of homelessness and of who's homeless here. Lastly, a few key takeaways. I know the methodology shift is a little weedy and confusing, but just to be crystal clear, the data we have from this year does not show an increase in unsheltered homelessness. If we look at, compared to last year, if we look at an apples to apples comparison with prior years, it actually would have shown us a 32% decrease. What it does do is give us a more accurate picture than we've had in the past about who's unsheltered, and that's more in line with what providers in the community have always seen and expressed. Very important to understand that this service system lost about 100 beds during the pandemic. And one thing we saw in this year's data is that that bed capacity is back up to pre-pandemic levels. And that's wonderful news that more people had the opportunity to be inside. We know that point in time count data will always be imperfect. And again, we want to really focus our efforts on improving year-round data collection through HMIS so that the COC has more meaningful and reliable data to drive its decision-making. And lastly, more accurate data is a great launch point for the new continuum of care. The more that the membership, the board, and the committees understand about who's homeless in our community, the better their strategy can be to develop an effective response for those folks. So some next steps are, and again, these are the same slides that were shared with the continuum of care membership. One of their core values is maintaining fidelity to data and evidence to guide decision-making. So the full membership, which right now is 316 people, full membership will receive the final results as they're submitted. The board that was newly elected at the April 25th meeting is responsible for setting strategy for the continuum of care, and they'll be able to use point-in-time data to help inform that strategy development. And then the system performance committee can fully analyze the point-in-time data, look for trends, make recommendations to the board. System planning and implementation committee can use that data to shape their development of the service system in the community. And then our responsibility as the lead agency and our staff team here in the Homeless Strategy Division is to submit those results. We just did that this morning. The deadline is tomorrow. So results have been submitted, and then we'll report those out. That is it for me. I'm happy to answer any additional questions. Thanks for your time this afternoon.
Thank you, Emily. The one thing I'd like to say, to share it, I think we could better serve the community and actually put a dent into actually getting some control over our homeless issues and areas. So I'd like to say that I'm greatly appreciative of all the work, Emily, that you've done here. You have been amazing. And I greatly appreciate everything you've done, and also the community, I'm quite sure it does, because this could definitely sort of change the trajectory to where we're in this community. I appreciate it.
That's right. Thank you so much. And I will say I'm so excited about the work of the continuum of care and the transition that we're in. I think it is a great moment in time for our community to really get arms around this issue and have a new way of working together that we just haven't had in the past, have better information than we've had in the past, and be able to really kind of link arms and go forward in a more strategic way.
Well, thank you, Emily. Great job. Vice Mayor, that is the last item we had slated for today's agenda, but we're happy to discuss any other questions or follow-up materials that council wants us to provide.
Okay, so does anyone have any questions, concerns, just statements they'd like to make? Okay, in that case, we're adjourned. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.